Right, so greetings. As I was saying, this is the book by my dear, one of my many heroes, Theodore Gaster, called Thespis, Ritual, Myth and Drama in the Ancient Near East. It had a foreword by Gilbert Murray, who was then one of the greatest classical scholars in Britain, and who sat on the board of the International Intellectual Cooperation Council, which was run by the League of Nations under a French academic, Bonnard, I think he was called, or Bonnet. And it had offices in Geneva, in the Palais des Nations. Also on it was Henry Bergson, Einstein, and many others, including this man, Gilbert Murray. And anyway, Theodore Gaster was a friend of his. And he's talking about the Canaanite, Hittite, Egyptian, and other mythical, ritual festivals and so on, and how they led to the birth of theatre, as well as in Greece. And so it was the same, as I say, with the Orphic tradition. Now the story, of course, we all know, I'm sure most people listening to this will know this, after his marriage to this let's call her a herbal expert in plant and the magic and healing of herbs and plants, the wood nymph, Eurydice, she was lusted after by the Lord of the Underworld, who had her killed and brought her down to him. And this is a terrible tragedy. Now, Orpheus discovered what had happened. He was a singer, a poet, a musician, a magician. He could use his chants and music to affect positive things in the world. He was a healer, he was a seer and a prophet. In other words, he was a druid, actually. And my surmise in my Encyclopedia of Druidry is that the Thracians actually were bumping up against the Celts in that region of the Danube. And we know that the Celts, with their druidry, were basically sharing that with the Thracians and vice versa, just as they did in northern Italy with the Etruscans. The Etruscans, very religious, spiritual, highly advanced people with prophetic gifts and so on, also shared with and borrowed from the Celt Druid traditions. And it was the same in the Thracian culture. And so Orpheus is very much working within that prototypical Druid culture. But, he didn't speak a Celtic language. He probably met Druids and they'd shared and learned things from each other. And you could say he was like a primal shaman as well, because many features of his life are very shamanic. And actually, Mircea Eliade, one of the great religious studies scholars of the last 100 years, he writes about Orpheus in that shamanic tradition in his great book on shamanism, which, if you haven't read it or got it, you should read it. So his beloved wife dies and goes to the underworld, Hades, the realm of death. Now, Orpheus wasn't going to take this lying down. He communed with the gods, and he asked permission to visit the underworld and bring his wife back, because he loved her so much, and she was young, and they had a life ahead of each other. And he used his magic, his skill as a musician, to tame his way into the underworld. He got past Cerberus and the guard dogs and stuff, using the magic power of song, and got all the way down to the throne of Persephone and Hades. Persephone was already down there with the Lord of the Underworld. Similar story had happened to her. Only this time he pleaded for his wife to be released from death, and after he'd sung a song or two and made some poems, they agreed to let her come back to him, come back to life. But the deal was only if you don't look back as you're leading her out of Hades. You can walk her up that path all the way to the cave entrance, and But not until you get to the outside world can you then look back. It's one of those sort of magical, getae, they're like features that are imposed on a story. It's a motif in folk tales. And, of course, we know that Orpheus, who loved his wife so much, I'm not sure, he must have seen her by then. You'd have thought he could have just not looked back, but of course, like all tales, he tragically had to look back to make sure she was following him. And in that moment, tragically, and he was nearly at the surface then, nearly at the cave entrance, and he foolishly looked back, and lo and behold, she then fell back into the abyss. She the spell was broken. She could no longer follow him. And that was such a cataclysmically tragic moment. It's enacted in operas. Gluck and many others have done operas about this. And Rilke did a whole cycle of poetry about all this, and he wove it into a much deeper kind of tapestry of meanings. And and then he goes into absolute mourning. The story is that for months and months, 7 months, he refused to go out. He couldn't eat. He was just in we'd say a nervous breakdown, depression, and all that. There are different versions as to what happened next. And I've been looking this week at like hundreds of scholarly sources on the Orphic legends, trying to make sense of, what actually happened and how we know. He became a figure of importance and interest to the Greek religion. It's thought he lived sometime around about maybe 1300 BC, possibly. He was some generations before the Trojan War, which is normally dated at about 1250 BC. He's 3 generations before Homer. So, no, sorry, he's after the Trojan War, but before Homer. So he's about 900 BC. What happened next? Well, he'd got involved in some religious reform movement. And some sources say he was the son of Apollo, which is important for the Druid link, because Apollo is also important as Luch, the god of the sun in Celtic world. And again, it would have been something they would have been able to discuss. And in my Encyclopedia of Druidry, I've gone into that, reconstructing Druid thought worlds around about 900, 1000 BC. They were the most important tribes north of the Alps and in that whole part of Central and Western Europe, but also down the Danube to the region of Thrace. He died eventually, and legend says that he was torn to pieces by Maenads, who were devotees of Dionysus, who were disgruntled at him. Now there's 2 versions of his death. One is that these angry women destroyed him because he'd been trying to reform their rituals, and they wanted to carry on doing their stuff, which included sacrifice, possibly even up to and including, in the early times, human sacrifice, certainly animal sacrifice aplenty, and these Maenads didn't want to be reformed, as it were, and so they were angry with him. And they tore him to pieces, literally, and scattered the pieces all over the plain. Now that's a horrendous story, but that's what the legend says. However, there's another version of the story, which is that he was actually struck dead by a lightning bolt from Zeus because he was giving away too many mysteries, revealing too much, because he'd set up these mystery initiations. He reformed the mystical traditions of Greek spirituality and Thracian. He blended Thracian and Greek spirituality, and And he did so by establishing this Orphic cult, as it was called, which involved the sort of initiation, the stages of initiation. When you left your sort of trappedness, your ignorance, your fallenness, and you gradually got on the path of initiateship, seership, and became illumined, enlightened. And so Zeus was angry with him, because Zeus is always annoyed at people giving too much wisdom to humanity. Zeus had some kind of problems, I think. He zapped him and killed him. That's another version of the story. And, again, what does that mean? Well, it seems to me Zeus represents sort of unjust power. That's why Shelley wrote Prometheus Unbound, because Shelley was an opponent of tyrannical, unjust power. And he wanted to use poetry to liberate mankind, just as Prometheus was trying to do. And so anyway, there's a mystery, but he did die, and however, the teachings lived on, and the Orphic cult developed into what's called Orphism, which lived underground, and it surfaces in poetry and literature from the 600s on in ancient Greece, and the very earliest classical sources. It gets into Plato. Plato talks about Orpheus and the story. He'd heard of him and knew of him. Plato founded his academy in Athens, dedicated it to the 9 Muses as a theasi, which is a religious association, so that he couldn't be, accused of something by Athenian law, which, just as then as now, these lawyers always want to get you for something. Well, Plato said, look, no, hands off, I'm just an academic, I'm just a teacher of religious studies, I'm teaching about the Muses. And he set that up in law, and that's kind of why I've set up my Museum of the Muses. I'm just a teacher of religious knowledge according to the Muses, But that is actually a Pythagorean and a Orphic move. Now, Plato was very much in that Orphic Pythagorean tradition. Pythagoras, by the way, came after, obviously, Orpheus, and was in that same lineage, and very much modelled his own career on that of Orpheus, and founded philosophy. We don't know the terminology Orpheus used so much, but we know that Pythagoras used the word philosophy to describe this process of intellectual ascent from darkness to light. Plato talked about it. He put into his dialogues clues about what this was. And in the Republic, the famous image of the cave, we're looking at the shadows on the wall. We don't see reality. We're stuck in our caves under pandemic. None of us can see truth. But behind the flickering shadows that we can see, there are forms of truth, which it's the duty of the philosopher to discern. And that's the intellectual journey that Orpheus actually called us to long ago, 900 BC. So I've been studying all this, and I think it's very interesting. And I've been working on the mathematical implications of all this. And it's complex. Let me just explain something about how complex this is, okay? So, in the Orphic cult, we now know something about their cosmology. It was written down. They found a papyrus at a place called Daffern in Macedonia. I've seen the original. It's in the museum in Thessalonica. And it gives a kind of mythical history of humanity, how we got here. It's like a sort of Orphic Bible. You could redo the book of Genesis with this story. And I think that's quite a good project, by the way. So in the beginning, the chaos, the nothingness is brought into being through eros. Eros is what shapes that chaos into form. Eros, being love, is what wants to bring form into being, because Eros loves form. Eros loves beautiful men and women and all the exquisite shapes and sculptures and artworks and so on. Eros brings form into being. Through the help of Phanes, who is the god of light. Phanes is illumination, the light that is enabling you to watch this talk, the light that operates the internet, that makes the electrons flow about. That's Phanes. Hopefully, you know, the love that I have for knowledge and wisdom shines a little bit through my talks, and that's Eros at work. Now, and that was fine, that's all good, that's how creation happened, right? That's the sort of backstory of Genesis. But something went wrong, and some sort of race of monstrous, like Titan-type characters came onto this planet. Now this is interesting because it's very much in parallel to the Book of Enoch, which talks about these fallen watchers, right? A sort of malevolent race somehow got onto this planet and was threatening creation. Now Zeus, meanwhile, had fallen in love with one of the beautiful women about, and had actually, I think it was Persephone, but don't tell anyone. And they'd created a little child who they were going to call Dionysus, who was going to be like a really amazing god, because Dionysus can do everything Shiva can do, plus everything Vishnu can do. I think Shiva's a sort of, Shiva and Vishnu together equals Dionysus, probably. Discuss, you know, it's a mathematical question. But the Titans got jealous, and they ganged up on baby Dionysus, and they you know, I'm sorry about this, but they killed him, little baby, and they tore him into pieces and stuck him into a cauldron, and they were going to eat him. Well, they started eating him, you know. What? Baby Dionysus being eaten by Titans? I mean, this is pretty grim stuff, you know, but it's all there in the Orphic myths and legends. And Zeus saw this and was so annoyed because this little baby boy had been eaten by the Titans and boiled, you know, the bits. And he zapped all the Titans with thunderbolts, and they all turned into ashes. Well done, Zeus, you know, like sometimes you need to do that, right? But, and this is where the story gets like weirder, out of those ashes of those Titans, we humans were formed. Because we're not gods, although some people think they are. No, we're just made from the ashes of the Titans. And I think Prometheus, Athena, everyone gave a hand, you know, into forging us. Well, that's quite an interesting myth. It means that, you know, and that's how the Orphic tradition explained why we have this kind of demonic streak in our nature. It's the pagan equivalent to the original sin tradition of Christianity. There's this demonic streak in us, this ego, this sort of Boris Johnson character that you know, has or Trump figure. I mean, they're just demons, they're Titan types. And the reason is because they are literally made from the ashes of Titans. And deep in us, we know that. So we like to behave as if we can take off and be really superpowered Titans. That's why all the kids play these computer games where they zap the world. They're the top Titan. You know, that explains all the kind of Star Wars type fantasy movies. And so, okay, so what happens next? Well, in the story, just when all is lost, you know, and the Titans are all destroyed and Dionysus is being cooked in the pot, Athena comes along. Blessed Athena, goddess of wisdom, I love her so much. She comes along and rescues the heart of Dionysus. Gets it out of the pot before it's all boiled away. And it's still beating. Blessed Athena, she takes it to Dad, takes it to Zeus, who then gives it to Semele, who's a beautiful woman, who becomes impregnated with Dionysus. Blessed, blessed, and then he's reborn. Born again as Dionysus, as a child. And so the world is saved because the god that was to have been destroyed by the Titans has survived. And that is why the Dionysus religion was so important to the Greeks. That was their passage to salvation. Because we're fallen creatures made of Titan ashes, But God in his infinite mercy has sent us the Saviour, Dionysus, who will come down even to the poor, the humble, the working classes, the farmers, and bring that divine grace. And has a number of tricks up his sleeve. How does he do that? Well, he invents wine. That's the succour and help of many a poor person on this planet. Many a person that's lost hope and can't cope. Okay, so Dionysus gives them that, because that recreates a little tiny glimpse of the heavenly grace, Of course, it's better if you can learn to do it without the actual wine. And that's just meditation, prayer, and all that. So, and Dionysus teaches, art, culture, music, and dance. All the things that bring ecstasy. All the things that take us out of ourselves to bring enlightenment. And he brings culture, and he brings the theatre. The theatre, one of the great achievements of Greek Dionysian culture, grew out of this. And just read Sophocles, read Aeschylus, read the great plays of these people. And that was Dionysus bringing to humanity the gift of hope, in spite of our Titan Ashes origin. Okay, so these secrets that I'm sharing now, these are not normally spoken about outside of the mystery schools, and or by classicists or scholars or philosophers. And in the Orphic school, this was what you received when you were initiated. We know that these Orphic mystery schools continued all the way down through Greek culture and all the way into the Roman era, and they were still going strong. At the time of Hadrian and the Roman fascination for the mystery schools. And they blended in with early Christianity. It's been discovered by archaeologists in the catacombs of Rome. On the walls there were paintings done by these very early generations of Christians of Christ as Orpheus, and leading the initiates to a better life, a better world, through the transforming power of wisdom. So, and that concept, I think the other thing that I've been looking at is the links between, not only in Orthodox, official Christianity, there's a huge Orphic imprint, not the least in the Mass, the bread and wine that Christ uses, are Orphic symbols. The wine, because Orpheus was a priest of Dionysus and Apollo, he used the sacraments to bring about a transformed consciousness. And in the Christian reenactment of this, there is, I think, it's a symbolic, initiation into the mysteries. You see, the mysteries, there's only one mystery, actually. We can call it the Mithraic, the Orphic, the Druidical, the Freemasonic, the Christian, the Sufi. But those are just like outer labels on the door, like water bottles when you go to the supermarket. It's all water. So there's only one mystery, really, which is the fact that we're here in bodies, and yet we're also in spirit as well. That we're... I would say, I would want to rephrase, I don't think we're made of the ashes of angels, or the ashes of the Titans. I think we're made from their love, actually. I don't think it's a fall so much as an embodiment of pre-existing spiritual principles, which in the mind of God, or whatever, however you want to try and explain that. There is a book by John Collins, I think, Anthony Collins, a British writer of esoteric stuff, called From the Ashes of Angels, where he takes this story of the, being made from the Titans and explores it. It's in lots of other cultures, actually, in the Middle East. He sort of speculates that maybe there was some advanced aliens that came and helped forge humanity. I suspend judgment, I don't know. But it's an interesting read, and his research is interesting. I have met him. And it fits in with some of the Enochian literature. I think we have to suspend judgment on. I have a slight reluctance to go down the sort of the kind of making all these ancient legends, kind of von Daniken stories of astronauts coming. I think I'm more in the Jungian school. I think these are more symbolic type stories about how humanity evolved out of our earlier states of consciousness. But there are many questions to ask about this Orphic tradition, and I've been asking them this week. I've been very busy on it. And one thing I do know is that the Orphic tradition stands for unity and love, just as the Christian does, as do all genuine mysteries. The reason they tell the horrendous story of baby Dionysus being torn apart and boiled is so it fills us with revulsion and hatred. I don't want to do that. I don't want to ever do that to anyone, you know. And when you're really being like mangled, torn apart, broken up, people are attacking you, but you're being bullied, you're being insulted with ignorance and lies, as we are so much these days by politicians. We're in the cauldron, we're all being boiled alive here. We're waiting for Athena to come and rescue us. Our hearts are still beating. And so I think we have to take out of this legend, this story, the living core of the myth and make it come alive, you know. And that's what the Orphic mystery schools did. And I believe, I'm working on this book on religious maths. I think I can prove mathematically that the people that in one generation were doing the Orphic mysteries moved over and started doing the Christian mysteries because they saw in Christ an enactment of the story. You know, it had been a while since any great prophet had turned up, like Orpheus or Pythagoreus. And so when Christ appeared and started doing his stuff, and news of that got out, and they read the New Testament, and they heard people who'd met him, and they heard Paul's testimony, and Matthew, and Thomas, and Mary Magdalene, and particularly the Gnostic schools developed, really as a sort of refinement of that original Orphic impulse. And one of the questions I've been asking is to what extent was Gnostic Christianity intertwined with and overlapped with the Orphic tradition? And I think there are some scholars working on that, but I think the obvious answer is yes, quite a lot. Also, the Kabbalah in Judaism, another mystery school of great profundity, is picking up on the same tradition, and in Isaac Luria's idea of the fall, the way the light is scattered and broken up into sparks, and our job as philosophers, thinkers, sages, whatever you want to call us, Kabbalists, is to bring those light sparks back into unity, then that is the same story. It's the Orphic story again. And it's the Christ story. It's the remembering of our original unity. So look, that's the metaphysics bit. And I just want to say, therefore, that, and I could go on, I'm finding out so much stuff about this Orphic thing. It's just amazing. They found lost texts and archaeological sites and things. I got the Mount Hemus Award from the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids a few years ago, bless them. And Mount Hemus is the place where Orpheus was born, in Thrace. I mean, it wasn't just one mountain, but mythically it was. And the Druids and the Orphic tradition are very, very close. We have this wonderful award, the Mount Hemus Award, that goes to different Druid scholars every year, and I hope it carries on now that Emer Burke has taken over the running of OBOD. It was set up under Philip Cargon, but I'm sure it'll carry on. And may, many good bards and druids come forward and receive it. And it will make a great study to do a really detailed study of the links between Orpheus and the Orphic tradition and the Druid traditions, and Thrace, Bulgaria. Those are the places to look. I've pointed to this in my Encyclopedia of Druid Studies, which I published last year, but of course, although it's 1,000 pages, I couldn't go into enormous detail. Which is why I'm working on religious maths now, because it's a way of asking these questions mathematically and with precision. how many texts do we have mentioning Orpheus from the ancient world? How many archaeological artifacts have been discovered in the last 100, 200 years with Orphic resonances and meaning? How many paintings in the classical masterpieces have featured Orpheus? How many pieces of music have featured Orpheus? Those kind of questions are mathematical and very, very precise, and they can be answered. And how many films? I mean, we've got Cocteau and a whole genre of Orpheus films using movies. And I would take it even up to Robin Williams, the late great actor who tragically died, and who made that amazing movie What Dreams May Come. If you haven't seen it, YouTube it. It's a masterpiece about his wife having a nervous breakdown and going into the underworld. And he goes to rescue her. It's the most moving film. And it's such a tragedy that Robin himself eventually died by his own hand. He had a terminal disease, and I guess he didn't want to face the pain. But, maybe medicine could have helped him or saved him or something. I feel really sad that we lost a great man because of his Dead Poets Society. When I was a teacher at school, I was always accused of running the Dead Poets Society, which I used to set up as the philosophy club in whatever school I worked in. And so but that film, What Dreams May Come, is a masterpiece, and it's about going in search of the fragmented other half, the Eurydice, the wife having a nervous breakdown or whatever, or the girlfriend. Some stories have it's the female going down to rescue the man. In the Middle East, it was Inanna going in search of Tumutsi, and the woman also sometimes has to go into the deep unconscious to get the man back right. So it's a very moving tradition, and that's what I've been working on. And I wanted to share that because I just want to say the following, that the reason I'm so much against Brexit is because it's about breaking and scattering. It's what the Titans do to poor old Dionysus. It's smashing apart, breaking up, chopping up, sticking in the cauldron, It's totally antithetical to the real traditions of European culture and civilization and philosophy and the Orphic mysteries that are underpinning all that. Plato was alive, or Orpheus himself, or Pythagoras, or any of the greats, Aristotle, you name them, all the way down to Heidegger and Sartre, from Thomas Aquinas and Duns Scotus, all the great intellectuals of Europe. We're all a team. It's not like what your nationhood is. I mean, that concept doesn't even arise. The Greeks knew that culture is not about ethnicity, it's about education. And there were debates going on, who is a true Hellene? Well, the answer was anybody who's truly educated is a true Hellene. It's not by ethnicity. It's the same with the Druid. Who is a true Druid? It's not someone who's descended from this or that. It's your educational and wisdom and attainment of enlightenment that calls you to service in whatever poetic, prophetic, healing or scientific guise. So that's what Brexit is an insult against. It's that unity that we share as a culture, as a continent. This is the voice of Europe. I feel like Radio Europe here, making my weekly broadcasts, And to me,